Hi, I'm Michael Gessel. I've been a long-time collector of Oz books, and I'm here to talk about books in the Wizard of Oz series. The series, of course, is full of great stories, but we're going to talk about the books as physical objects. And specifically, I'm going to talk about how you can figure out just what you have and when it was printed, and whether you might have one of the early, valuable first editions or another early edition. Of course, the value of the books depends on a lot of things, particularly condition, and whether you have the very first printings. We're not going to go into too much detail about identifying the first printings and the later printings, but I am going to talk about, in general, the early editions and how to tell them from the later editions. There were 40 books in what we consider to be the Oz series, or the Fabulous 40. The first was, of course, The Wizard of Oz, written by L. Frank Baum. And there were about a half a dozen authors in total in the Oz series, the last one being written in 1963. There were, one of the reasons for collecting the early editions of the Oz books is because many of the early books were wonderful examples of bookmaking. They had special features, color plates, color drawings throughout the text, metallic inks. They're really very pretty books, and a lot of those features were dropped in the later editions. So for that reason, it's kind of nice to have the early editions. Now to start, let me explain a little bit about some of the terminology that I'll be using. This is the spine, and the spine imprint is the name of the publisher, which is found at the bottom of the spine. This, of course, is the cover. And this is a paper paste label. That's like a plate that's printed and then pasted down on the cloth cover. These are the end papers, and if there's a picture, they're pictorial end papers. This is the title page over here, and obviously it has the title of the book. And on this side is the printer's advertisement. And it's a little in-house ad put by the publisher. I'm sorry, it's the publisher's advertisement. And it's a little in-house advertisement for some of the other books that are published by that publisher or that are in the series. And these are the plates. The plates are often printed on coated stock that's different from the text paper, and they're not printed with the text. They're printed separately and then bound into the book, or they're pasted into the book, and not always bound at the same time. And one other feature that I'll call attention to is the signature. A signature, or a gathering, is a group of pages that is made up when a large sheet is run through the printing press, and then it's folded, and then the collected signatures are then bound together. We'll talk a little bit more about how to identify those. The first book in the Oz series is The Wizard of Oz, and it's a complicated book to identify. There were numerous variants of the first edition, but all the early editions were published by the George M. Hill Publishing Company. And it says at the bottom of the spine, you can't see this very well because this isn't a great copy, George M. Hill. The Hill Company went out of business shortly after The Wizard of Oz was published in 1900. And so it's very easy to identify those early editions because they are Hill editions, and anything that's later was published by Bobbs Merrill or other publishing companies after the Hill Company went out of business. There are many, many variations, as I said. There are variations even on the color plates. Some of them were printed one way and then changes were made in the later printings. The color of the spine imprint is different. The printer's advertisement changes. But all of the firsts look just like this. And it's a heavy book, oddly squarish, with this sort of delightful green cover. Now you do have to be careful. There are many reprints of The Wizard of Oz that look like that. For example, this is a modern reprint of the Hill edition. This was published by Books of Wonder. And it looks a lot like the first edition. But of course, if you open it up, even though it has the same original title page, at the bottom it says Books of Wonder. The second book in the Oz series, The Marvelous Land of Oz, is also a little bit complicated. Let's see, where do we have here? This is my rather tattered copy. Now this was published by the Riley and Britton Company. After the Hill Company went out of business, Baum used the Riley and Britton Company to publish the books in the Oz series. The Riley and Britton Company became Riley and Lee in 1919. So any book that is published by the Riley and Britton Company would have been published between 1904, which is The Marvelous Land of Oz, and 1918. The very earliest copies of The Marvelous Land of Oz have the full title, Marvelous Land of Oz. The later, but still early copies of The Marvelous Land of Oz leave out Marvelous, and they just say Land of Oz. This book had 16 color plates, and they're all very pretty. The plates were dropped in the later edition. I'm trying to find a plate. As I said, this is quite a tattered copy. So this is an example of one of the color plates. Now, the next book after The Marvelous Land of Oz is Osmo of Oz. The Riley and Britton Company. Now, this has a stamped label, or sorry, a stamped cover. So the later editions of Osmo of Oz have a pictorial paste down label. This is the paste down label. But the very earliest editions of Osmo of Oz have this stamped, very attractive cover. One of the nice features about Osmo of Oz, the early editions, is that it has color illustrations throughout. So the beginnings of each of the chapters have these color text illustrations. This has no color. The plates in this, or I should say the full page illustrations, are not pasted in plates. See, here's the color illustrations throughout. These are in the early editions. The later editions of Osmo of Oz drop those color illustrations throughout. Then let's see, we have Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz. One of the nice features about the early edition of this book is that the cover paste down label has gold metallic ink, and the later editions show yellow. Again, the Riley and Britton Company. Color pictorial end papers. And I think there's a publisher's advertisement in this. Here's a publisher's advertisement. And the publisher's advertisements are very good ways to date the books. So this book, which was published in 1908, shows the early Oz books plus John Doe and the Cherub. And if you see a book that has a publisher's advertisement that lists books that were published after the first edition, then you know that this is not a first edition. In this case, all of these books were published before 1908, so it is a first edition. The Road to Oz is a gorgeous book in its earlier editions. Okay, again, the Riley and Britton Company. This is a stamped cover. The later editions had a pictorial label. This had no color plates. In fact, it had no color illustrations at all. But the pages are printed on colored paper. And so as the Oz adventures go from one place to another, the color of the paper changes. And this was dropped in the later editions. The Emerald City of Oz, the earliest editions of these books, have this wonderful bronze metallic overlay. There's 16 color plates in the Emerald City of Oz, plus the cover label. And here's a publisher's advertisement. The last book that it lists is, the last Oz book is Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz and John Doe and the Cherub. And there are no titles that were listed in the publisher's advertisement that were after the first printing of the Emerald City of Oz. Like many of these early books, very attractive color end papers. After the Emerald City of Oz, we waited a couple of years, and then the Patchwork Girl of Oz came out. Early edition, Riley and Britton Company. Now the Patchwork Girl of Oz did not have any colored plates, but it had, like Osmo of Oz, color illustrations throughout. Attractive color pictorial end papers. Then, in 1919, the Oz books were published by the Riley and Lee Company. This is The Magic of Oz. This is the first book in the Oz series that was published by Riley and Lee. You can see at the bottom the imprint, Riley and Lee. Pictorial end papers, but these are in black and white. Publisher's advertisement with titles to the Tin Woodman of Oz. And the Tin Woodman of Oz was the Oz book that immediately preceded The Magic of Oz. Now another way of identifying the early editions is if you are fortunate enough to find a copy that has a dust jacket. Because most of the dust jackets listed the books in the Oz series. So this is a first edition of The Hungry Tiger of Oz, and it lists the books in the Oz series, and the last one on the list is The Hungry Tiger of Oz. So if you run across a copy of an Oz book that has a dust jacket, and the dust jacket lists titles after the book has been published, the book that you're holding has been published, then you know it's not a first edition. But the dust jackets are hard to come by, and they're quite collectible even if they're not first editions. Then a couple things changed as the Oz books went on and on through the years. Around 1935, the color plates were dropped. And so this book, Captain Salt in Oz, this was published in 1936. It never had colored plates. All the first editions, at least the ones that originally had color plates, were published with color plates up until around 1935, and then all the color plates were dropped. So if you run across an Oz book that has color plates, there's a good chance it was published before 1935. And if it didn't have color plates, then it was probably published after 1935. Of course, as I mentioned, some of the books did not have color plates originally. Let's see, what else do we have here? Another way to date books is by looking at the signatures. And this is a little bit hard to tell. The Shaggy Man of Oz, which was published in 1949, has mostly 16-page signatures. It's a little bit hard to figure out what the signatures are. You have to look at the top and see where the pages naturally fall. And sometimes you identify the center of the signatures, and then you can count from one center of the signatures to the center of the next signatures. And if that's a total of 16 pages, then that's a 16-page signature. Keep in mind that when we talk about 16-page signatures, this is a page and this is a page. The leaf comprises 2 pages. Now, the next book, the Hidden Valley of Oz, this has 32-page signatures. And so it's a little bit hard to see, but the signatures are much fatter. So you can sort of make out where the signatures break. Now, many of the Oz books followed that same pattern. The early ones had 16-page signatures, and then around the time of the Hidden Valley of Oz, which would have been in the 1950s, the 16-page signatures were dropped, and the rest were 32-page signatures. In the 1950s, there were a number of changes that were made in the Oz books to cheapen them. The pictorial labels were dropped. So this, of course, is the early edition, so this has a pictorial label, but these were then dropped in the 1950s, in the later 1950s. The end papers were dropped. Many of the books starting in the 1950s were published with blank end papers, so you don't see these attractive pictures. And so that's another way that you can date the Oz books. Now, I've just given a very high-level overview on how to roughly date the Oz books. But there are books and reference works that will give you a much better idea to very narrowly date your books, or tell whether they are the highly collectible first issues of the first editions or later issues of the first edition. I'll show you 2 of them. This is Bibliographia Oziana, which was published by the International Wizard of Oz Club. It's still in print. There are a couple different editions floating around, and they have different color covers. And this goes through each of the books in the Oz series, and it also includes a number of other books that are Oz related or that are by the Oz authors, and tells a little bit about them. And it goes into detail and talks about the actual points, talks about the specific type changes that were made from edition to edition, goes into detail about the spine imprints and the kind of type that was used in the spine imprints. And so that if you, with a book like this, you can figure out exactly what it is that you have. There's another book too, called The Book Collector's Guide to L. Frank Baum and Oz by Paul Bienview. This is a nice hefty book. It's got color illustrations, and it goes into much more detail. Includes more than just the Oz books, but includes a number of other collectible Oz-related items and tells how to identify them. So I hope that this has been helpful. If you want to get more information, get one of these reference books, and then you can identify exactly what you have. Collecting Oz books can be a lot of fun, and you don't really need to get the first edition, first issues of each one of the books unless you're a die-hard collector. But getting the early editions, the ones with the attractive color plates, with the pictorial end papers, with the nice paper labels, is worth the hunt. Thank you.